I want you to take a second and just look around at your current living situation.
Right, whatever that looks like for you right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe you are listening to this by yourself in a quiet, one-bedroom apartment. Or maybe you're surrounded by, like, three noisy roommates.
Or perhaps you're sitting at the kitchen table with your spouse and kids.
Right. And we usually think of our living arrangements as just a matter of budget or convenience or, well, just the stage of life we happen to be in.
Sure, it's logistical.
But what if the exact way you choose to live, specifically who you live with and how you share your resources, was actually the ultimate deciding factor for your spiritual salvation?
It's a massive leap.
It really is. That leap from deciding whose turn it is to buy the dish soap to determining whether you are going to enter the kingdom of heaven is, well, it's the exact premise of a fascinating text we are exploring today on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's by an author named Feng, and it's titled Collective Life is Superior to Individual Life.
And the core argument here is, I mean, it's radical.
Oh, absolutely. The text claims that shedding your individuality to join a very specific, immersive type of collective living is, well, it's the singular path to psychological health, personal freedom, and ultimately a higher spiritual existence.
Which is a huge claim to make.
It really is. And it weaves together these heavily charged concepts, explicitly juxtaposing communism and capitalism, while, simultaneously synthesizing theology from multiple major world religions.
Yeah, it definitely leans heavily into politically charged economic models and religious doctrines. And I want to say right up front, regardless of where you or I happen to fall on the political or spiritual spectrum, looking purely at the mechanics of Feng's argument provides just an incredible thought experiment.
Right, we aren't taking sides here.
Exactly. We're simply here to synthesize the blueprint the author lays out. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even grasp why this collective life is supposedly superior, we have to understand how the author completely rewrites the dictionary on two basic concepts.
The individual and the collective.
Right, so how does the text define them?
Well, in this framework, individual life doesn't just mean, living alone in a studio apartment. It is defined as any mode of existence where a person lives independently according to capitalist principles.
Okay.
And conversely, collective life is defined strictly as living together according to communist principles. But the author draws the boundary lines in a way that completely upends our normal social categories.
Yeah, and that is where the text throws its first massive curveball. Because when we hear the phrase capitalist individual life, the immediate mental image is, I don't know, a single Wall Street banker in a penthouse hoarding wealth.
Exactly, the stereotypical billionaire.
Right. But Sufen categorizes traditional family life, like the nuclear family, as inherently capitalist in nature.
Which is wild to think about. But the author acknowledges that family life might take the outward form of communism simply because, well, you are sharing resources with your spouse and children.
But its underlying nature is different.
Yes, the text argues its underlying nature is still fiercely capitalist. You are hoarding resources and prioritizing your small, exclusive genetic group over the broader community.
It's almost like viewing traditional family units as miniature isolated corporations constantly competing with one another.
That's a great way to put it.
Like you have Smith Family Inc. hoarding their wealth, saving for their specific kids' college funds, and building a literal fence to separate themselves from, Jones Family Inc. across the street.
Right, the friction of capitalism is just scaled down to the suburban cul-de-sac.
But I have to push back here because it is incredibly jarring to hear providing for your family lumped in with selfishness. I mean, for the vast majority of people, sacrificing your own needs to feed your kids is viewed as the ultimate act of selflessness.
What's fascinating here is how the author systematically strips away the romanticization of the nuclear family.
Okay, how so?
By framing the family unit as an exclusive, inherently defensive construct, the text paves the way for a much broader, boundaryless societal structure. The logic is that localized loving only your specific spouse and your specific children actually starves the broader community of that energy.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the text assigns very specific, highly polarizing personality traits to these two lifestyles.
And it doesn't pull any punches either. The text argues that individual life is only suited for people with deeply negative traits.
Really negative.
Yeah, it describes them as barbarous, ignorant, selfish, narrow-minded, insidious, jealous, and resentful. Essentially, if you have a desire to build a private life, It is a direct symptom of having a dark psychology and bad habits.
Right. And on the other side of the ledger, the collective life is reserved strictly for the civilized, the well-educated, the public-minded, the kind, loving, and merciful.
It's a very black and white view.
Very. It explicitly states this lifestyle is for people who are free of mental or physiological defects. It creates a stark, uncompromising dichotomy. You are either selfishly guarding your individual life, or you are evolved enough to dissolve into the collective.
So if individuality is inherently toxic according to this text, what does the day-to-day alternative actually look like?
That's the big question.
Because a pure collective where everyone shares everything sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare to a modern listener. I mean, we're used to managing our own schedules.
Sure, but Ufifeng argues that our current way of living is literally making us sick. When we live independently, we isolate ourselves, which the text claims is the root breeding ground for anxiety, monotony, and depression.
Okay, so the text claims collective life means less likelihood of depression and mental illness.
Exactly. And the solution isn't just a change in mindset, it's the sheer practical mechanics of the collective.
The logistics of it.
Right. By pooling our physical labor and survival chores, say, cooking, cleaning, and maintaining shelter for 100 people as a coordinated unit, instead of isolated families doing it all separately, the community suddenly manufactures an immense abundance of leisure time.
Oh, I see. It's the economy of scale applied to human energy.
Exactly.
Instead of 50 different people cooking 50 different dinners in 50 different kitchens every single night, a few people handle the food for everyone, freeing up dozens of hours for the rest.
And the text claims this division of labor provides unprecedented time for entertainment and self-cultivation. It makes life, as the author puts it, more colorful.
It cures the monotony of the individual grind.
Yes, and it ties directly into the guiding principle of sharing weal and woe, which means sharing both the prosperity and the suffering.
Okay, so sharing the highs and the lows.
Right. In an individual life, if you lose your job, you face catastrophic ruin alone. The pressure is entirely on your shoulders.
Which causes massive anxiety and fear.
Exactly. But in this collective, because the pressure of survival is dispersed across a massive safety net, the sheer weight of daily existence is lifted. The text argues that this specific mechanical dispersal of pressure makes happiness significantly easier to achieve.
But then the text makes a claim about freedom that, honestly, it made me stop and reread the page entirely.
Oh, the transparency point.
Yes. It argues that because a collective life involves constant, transparent communication with everyone around you, people actually face fewer restrictions and enjoy greater personal freedom.
It's definitely a paradox at first glance.
Wait, how does being in a collective where you are constantly surrounded by others give you fewer restrictions and more freedom? Because being constantly surrounded by people and sharing everything seems totally counterintuitive to how we usually define personal freedom.
It really does.
We usually think of freedom as the ability to escape other people's rules and oversight. Are they arguing that privacy is actually a prison?
It completely flips the Western concept of liberty on its head. But if you look at the underlying logic of the text, it begins to make a strange kind of sense.
Okay, walk me through it.
Well, in an individualistic, capitalist society, people are constantly competing for scarce resources. Because of that relentless competition, we are forced to build walls. We hide our intentions. We create incredibly complex legal contracts. We lock our door.
Need alarm systems.
Exactly. And we constantly check and balance each other out of a fundamental lack of trust.
The mental energy we spend just defending our private lives is exhausting. We spend half our lives guarding our stuff and our status.
Precisely. If you own nothing privately, you have nothing to protect. The text argues that in a true collective, the constant communication and the total lack of private property eliminate the need for hidden agendas.
So no one is plotting against you because there's nothing to steal?
Right. If everyone is genuinely sharing weal and woe, there is no need to guard yourself. You don't need a complex system of defensive checks and balances if everyone is pulling the exact same rope in the exact same direction.
Wow.
And the elimination of that defensive posture, the mental energy you save by not having to suspect your neighbor, is what the author defines as true, unadulterated freedom.
So what does this all mean? We have a societal blueprint that supposedly cures depression through sheer logistics, manufactures free time through economies of scale, and completely redefines personal freedom by abolishing privacy.
That's the practical side of it, yeah.
But the text doesn't stop at being a practical lifestyle manifesto, does it? It takes all of these logistical benefits and suddenly elevates them, transitioning the entire argument into something with massive cosmic stakes.
Yeah, this is where the blueprint leaves the earthly realm. The text declares that collective life is the necessary, non-negotiable road that leads to higher life spaces, specifically referencing the heavenly kingdom.
So you have to live with roommates to get into heaven.
Pretty much. It warns that individual life induces a level of selfishness that makes it literally impossible to ascend spiritually.
Okay, to explain the mechanics of how a living arrangement dictates your afterlife, the text introduces a highly specific concept called the non-material structure of life.
Yes, and you can think of this non-material structure of life as your spiritual DNA, or maybe your energetic frequency.
Okay, spiritual DNA.
According to Shufeng, every human being has this underlying, invisible architecture that dictates their consciousness. The text argues that the more perfect your non-material structure is, the more naturally you will crave and love collective life. Your frequency is basically tuned to harmony.
And if your non-material structure is flawed, the exact opposite happens. You will desperately cling to your individual life.
Yeah, you'll want to be alone.
You will actively resist blending into a community because the harmony feels abrasive to you. It basically says your preference for a private apartment isn't just a personality quirk. It is a direct, measurable symptom of a diseased spiritual architecture.
The causality here is crucial. A flawed structure is calcified around the concept of mine, my house, my family, my money. Because it is so dense with material attachment, it cannot process the communal energy of ours.
So it's an incompatibility issue?
Exactly. It's like trying to plug a 120-volt appliance into a 240-volt outlet. The current of the collective is simply too overwhelming for a selfish circuit, and it just blows the fuse.
Which brings us to the text's fascinating reinterpretation of a very famous biblical teaching. Jesus Christ warned that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right, a classic verse.
In the mainstream tradition, this is almost universally interpreted as a warning against the corrupting nature of material greed, like money itself is the problem.
But Xue Feng interprets the mechanics of that warning completely differently. The text argues that the wealthy man's problem isn't just the sheer volume of his money.
It's what the money represents.
Exactly. The structural flaw is that a rich person, by definition, has successfully isolated themselves and refuses to live collectively. They have built the ultimate individual life and refuse to share their resources.
The logic is that the heavenly kingdom itself is a collective life. The text explicitly states that in heaven, there are neither rich people nor poor people.
Everyone is equal.
Right. Therefore, a wealthy person, someone whose entire spiritual DNA is built around individual hoarding, literally cannot exist in that space. The energetic incompatibility means they would be rejected by the very atmosphere of paradise.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The author doesn't just rely on Christian theology to prove this point. The text acts as this massive spiritual crossover event.
Yeah, it pulls from everywhere.
It attempts to synthesize the core tenets of major global spiritual traditions into one unified theory of communal living, a philosophy the author calls Lifechanyuan. It urges the reader to check its claims against the teachings of Buddha Sakyamuni and the celestial being Lao Tzu.
It takes these radically different traditions and finds, like the common denominator between them.
It really does. For example, Buddha's teachings on the renunciation of earthly attachments and the dismantling of the ego become the ultimate psychological preparation for communist living.
Right, because if you have no ego, you have no need for private property.
Exactly. And Lao Tzu's concept of the Tao, the natural, effortless flow of the universe, is aligned with the harmony of the collective.
Okay, I see.
In this synthesis, living an individual life is like trying to swim furiously upstream against the current of the Tao, whereas the collective life is floating effortlessly with the river.
But what is so compelling about how the text presents this synthesis is the method of verification it demands. It doesn't ask you to just blindly take the author's word for it.
No, it puts the burden on the reader.
It challenges you to use your own spiritual perception. It asks you to look inward, claiming that if you genuinely investigate the teachings of these historical sages without your modern capitalist biases, you will inevitably realize that collective life has always been the ultimate goal of spiritual evolution.
It is a very clever rhetorical device. By telling the reader to rely on their own spiritual perception, Any resistance the reader feels to the idea of giving up their individuality is automatically framed as evidence of their own flawed, non-material structure.
That is clever.
Right.
So if we follow the logic so far, individual life is selfish and spiritually diseased. Collective life is the ultimate utopia, endorsed by all the major sages throughout human history, and it is the strict prerequisite for entering heaven.
That's the thesis. Yeah.
Which begs a pretty massive logistical question. If this collective life is so amazing, can anyone just sign up, pack their bags, and walk through the front doors of paradise?
The text provides a resounding and remarkably harsh no. Yes. This utopia has a very strict bouncer at the dates. The author describes a specific physical community referred to as the second home, which is now known as the new oasis for life. And the elimination process for getting in, or staying in, is incredibly rigorous.
It explicitly states that not everyone is qualified to participate. If a person hasn't been deeply influenced by these specific Lifechanyuan values, they will find it impossible to live there and will be, to use the text's exact word, eliminated very quickly.
The filter is unforgiving. It bars people who are arrogant, irrational, narrow-minded, dishonest, or ill-bred.
Which, okay, nobody wants to live with an arrogant, dishonest roommate.
Fair enough. But the requirement that stands out the most is the explicit ban on people with mental and psychological handicaps. They are not allowed to stay in the community.
And I have to raise a critical pushback on the philosophy here. Because for a system that is built entirely on the beautiful concept of sharing weal and woe, sharing the suffering and the burdens of your fellow human beings, it has a remarkably ruthless filter.
It really does seem contradictory.
Right. You would think a true utopian collective, one that claims to cure depression and anxiety, would be the exact place where people struggling with mental or psychological burdens could be supported and healed.
But it's not.
No, instead, it treats them as a structural liability that must be eliminated to preserve the harmony of the group.
It is a profound contradiction to the modern, inclusive way we usually think about community care. But if we look purely at the author's internal framework, this collective is not designed to be a hospital for the spiritually or psychologically unwell.
What is it designed to be then?
It is meant to be a physical manifestation of the heavenly kingdom on earth. And in paradise, there is no sickness. The text argues that a mind burdened with severe psychological handicaps simply does not match the collective structure.
So the atmosphere of sharing everything, the total lack of boundaries, would feel like an unbearable bondage to someone whose mind isn't perfectly aligned with it.
Exactly.
Putting a misaligned structure into a pure collective wouldn't heal them. It would feel like torture.
That's exactly the mechanism the author implies. The text views your ability to smoothly and happily blend into this collective as the ultimate touchstone, the ultimate test of your spiritual cultivation.
Like a final exam.
Yes. It doesn't matter how well you know the scriptures or how eloquently you can speak about enlightenment. The only thing that proves you have achieved a high spiritual state is if your inner mind truly loves the collective with absolutely no reservations.
And if you don't?
If you experience friction, if you struggle to let go of your private thoughts and private property, your cultivation has failed.
It is the final, undeniable exam of your spiritual DNA.
This raises an important question, though. In so many profound spiritual traditions across the world, the journey to enlightenment is deeply inherently personal.
Right, like the lone monk on the mountain.
Exactly. It involves retreating into solitude, fasting in the desert, or meditating completely alone under a tree. But this text completely inverts that historical paradigm.
It says the group is more important than the individual solo journey.
Right. So if the ultimate measure of spiritual evolution is absolute conformity to a collective atmosphere, where does that leave the value of the unique individual spiritual journey? Are we losing something vital by entirely pathologizing the concept of individuality?
That is a profound tension, and it brings us full circle to the journey we've taken on this deep dive. We started with a very mundane concept of who you share your kitchen with, whether you are living with roommates, a spouse, or by yourself.
The logistics of daily life.
Yeah. And we've explored how this text elevates that everyday logistical choice into a cosmic mandate. It takes a communist social structures, systematically strips away the traditional nuclear family, and synthesizes global spiritual traditions to argue that true salvation is only found when the I completely dissolves into the we.
It forces us to examine the invisible architectures of our own lives and the amount of energy we expend maintaining them.
It really does. And so I want to address you listening right now. Take a moment to think about your daily routine. think about where your energy actually goes.
It's a tough mirror to look into.
It is. How much of your daily effort is spent building your own individual castle, securing your own finances, building your own family's wealth, creating a buffer of comfort between you and the outside world? And how much of your energy actually goes towards sharing the weal and woe with a broader community?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, well, the text argues that a flawed, non-material structure makes humans crave individuality and isolation. And I want you to look at our modern hyper-technological world.
It's incredibly isolating.
We are living in an era of unprecedented individualization. Technology has advanced to the point where you can work from your laptop at home, order your groceries to be left on your doorstep, and entertain yourself endlessly through a screen without ever needing to speak to a neighbor or rely on your local community for anything.
You could live in an apartment building surrounded by thousands of people in a crowded city and remain entirely perfectly isolated.
So the final lingering question we have to ask ourselves, inspired by the mechanics of this source material, is this. Are we mistakenly celebrating our technological independence?
Oh.
While we think we are achieving the ultimate personal freedom by removing our reliance on others, are we actually, according to the logic of Su Feng's text, engineering our own spiritual devolution?
A very heavy question to ponder the next time you lock the deadbolt on your front door and settle into your individual life. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible structures of your everyday life, and we will see you next time.